get things kicked off on the right foot. So a little bit about me. I'm from California. I went to Georgetown to study international politics, went abroad for a couple of years to teach English in China, and did nonprofit work in Thailand, and returned to DC, and that's where I discovered Tableau. I was working on a project trying to join multiple different data sources with 60,000 records, was working through every iteration of Power Pivot, Power Query, Power BI, which I don't like to talk about, but discovered Tableau and had my aha moment and decided I wanted to do this 100% of my time. So as a consultant, I help customers build dashboards, and I love what I do. One of the things that I do in my spare time, I do triathlons. And one piece of advice I would give you if you're learning Tableau is to try something out on your own data, something that you're interested in, because you can relate with it a little bit better, and that will help the learning curve. So I was interested in seeing how my performance compared to some other people in my age group. I wanted to see where to focus my time. Turns out the bike is the longest, so that's the most bang for your buck, if you will. Wanted to understand what the best age range was. You know, with endurance sports, it's usually in the mid-age, so I'm excited to improve. But I wanted to tell this story because I came from a non-technical background, and so I wanted to encourage those who are new and might not come from that sort of background that you can also pull yourself up from your bootstraps and learn Tableau. So we'll go through the agenda. We're going to talk about the issue, so why are we here? We'll go through our objectives, through the design process. We'll review some chart options together, and then we'll practice. So I want to make sure that you can take this back outside of these doors to your own questions. And then we'll save Q&A for the end. So what's the issue? A lot of times when people start with Tableau, they might be overwhelmed with too many options. There's a lot of chart types, but which one do I choose, right? There's a bunch of options in Show Me, but you might not know when to use one chart versus the other. A lot of times you get a request for something pretty or eye-catching, wowing, right? You just want to make something beautiful. But ultimately what happens is people choose a chart and try to fit their data into that chart, and it doesn't actually answer the question that they're trying to answer, and it doesn't actually help them tell the story that they want to tell. And so what I'd like to do is sort of reverse that process and take you through a series of steps. This sort of came out of a project of my own. I wrote this little cheat sheet for myself where I sort of matched up charts with different purposes. And I found myself referring back to this again and again, and I wanted to share it with you and my customers. So I've made a prettier version of this, so you don't have to refer to this. But this is the basic idea of today's session. So my objectives for today, I want to give you a structured process for decision making. I want to empower you to make the right choice. And when I say right, I mean right for your business. So you know your business best. You can make that choice. And I also want to help you unleash your full creativity, because at the end of the day, Tableau is fun. And you should be able to make something pretty in Tableau, too. That also answers your questions. So here's the process. Determine your question, identify the purpose, select the chart, and then apply visual best practice. So let's go through the first step, determine question. So I'll start with my customers and I'll ask, what do you want to know? What are your business questions? They'll come back to me and say, what are my overall sales? Okay, let's say your overall sales are $1 million. So what? That's a number, right? I need some more context. What do you want to know? So what? Why is this important? What action do you want your audience to take? So I really encourage them to dig deeper, to think about the underlying questions behind this first overall question. So let's say you want to know the trend in your sales. Maybe that means maybe you want to be able to better forecast for next quarter. Maybe you want to understand how one product is contributing to sales because maybe you need to discontinue it. Maybe you want to understand if you've met your sales target for the quarter yet. So we've come up with some more specific questions. And in the identify purpose stage of this, we'll highlight some key terms. Right, so we get trend here. We have contribute to overall, and we have target. And that will give us an indication of what kind of purpose this question is getting at. So what is a trend of my overall sales? That's a time question. How much does each product contribute to overall sales? That's a compare parts to whole question. Have I met my target for overall sales? That's a comparing measures question. So here are some of the other common purposes that I've found when working with my customers. So let's say specific values. So let's go back to triathlons. I want to know the exact time of my swim, my bike, and my run. For a correlation question, maybe I want to know if there's a relationship between age and finish time. For a time question, maybe I want to know how long it takes for me to go through the swim, transition, bike, run. For comparing measures, maybe I want to compare my performance this year versus last year. Hopefully I've improved. Comparing rank, again, comparing rank within age groups or within your gender. When you compare parts to whole, maybe that's when you are trying to decide, when you're trying to look at the swim takes up, let's say, 30% of the race, the bike takes up 60%, and the run takes up the last 10%, which is not true, but distribution, maybe you want to see if there's any outliers. Maybe someone's a really great runner, and you want to see how that maps out compared to the rest of the normal distribution. And then mapping, maybe I want to check my Garmin and see how crooked I swam in the open water. So these, again, are some of the common purposes that I've found. So we've just gone through the first two steps together, determine question and identify purpose. So let's do this together. So here's my question. What is the average beignet consumption of a Tableau conference attendee? But again, we need to ask, so what? Why is that important? And what action do you want your audience to take with this information? So maybe I'm organizing data night out, and I need to order a bunch of beignets for everyone. Or maybe I am Café du Monde, and I need to anticipate the demand for all of these 18,000 people coming in. So let's say we've come up with these questions. What is the spread of the number of beignets consumed? Maybe someone has eaten 100 beignets already, or maybe someone's gluten-free and can't eat any beignets. Does the number of beignets consumed relate to the number of times an attendee has been to New Orleans before? This is my first time to New Orleans, and I've eaten 3 beignets so far. And were most of these beignets consumed at Café du Monde? So in the identify purpose section, I just want you to take a couple of seconds and identify which keywords you would pull out of these 3 questions. Great. So for the first question, which keyword would you pull out? Spread. Great. For the second question, relate. Thank you. And the last question is a little difficult, but let's say at. So these indicate what kind of purpose we're getting at. A distribution question, a correlation question, and a mapping question. So now it's your turn with a neighbor. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'd like you to introduce yourselves and think of a question that you've been trying to answer with your business And then ask each other, so what? Why is that important? What action do you want your audience to take? And then identify those key words in those questions so that you can identify the purpose. Okay.
Time that she gets closer, she pulls me in enough to keep me guessing. Maybe I should stop and start confessing, yeah. Oh, I've been shaking. I love it when you go crazy. You take all my inhibitions, baby. There's nothing holding me back. You take me places that tear up my reputation, manipulate my decisions, baby. There's nothing holding me back. There's nothing holding me back. There's nothing holding me back. She says that she's never afraid. Just picture everybody naked. She really doesn't like to wait. Not really into hesitation. Pulls me in enough to keep me guessing. Maybe I should stop and start confessing, yeah. Oh, I've been shaking. I love it when you go crazy. You take all my inhibitions, baby. There's nothing holding me back. You take me places that tear up my reputation, manipulate my decisions, baby. There's nothing holding me back. There's nothing holding me back. Cause if we lost our minds and we took it way too far, I know we'd be alright. I know we would be alright if you were by my side. When we stumbled in the dark, I know we'd be alright. I know we would be alright. Cause if we lost our minds and we took it way too far, I know we'd be alright. I know we would be alright if you were by my side. We stumbled in the dark, I know we'd be alright. We would be alright. Oh, I've been shaking. I love it when you go crazy. You take all my inhibitions, baby. There's nothing holding me back. You take me places that tear up my reputation, manipulate my decisions, baby. There's nothing holding me back. There's nothing holding me back. I feel so free when you're with me, baby. Baby, there's nothing holding me back. Oh, I can see the future coming to you, crying with the sadness in your eyes. And I can find a faith in days I've wasted, been around enough to feel alive. And when the world is broken, hard and cold, no one ever knows the reason why. For the ones we may become, for the battles we've won, for the day we reach the sun, gonna play it loud tonight.
Okay, let's wrap it up. Thank you. So now we've done the first 2 steps together, and we'll go through the next 2 together. And keep those questions in mind because I'll have you select the charts to those afterwards. So this is the sheet that I made for you. But which ones do you recognize? Feel free to shout them out. Scatter graph, bubble chart, great. Map, bar chart, great. Yeah, I mean, some of them have different names, and they can go by different things. So here are the names that I assigned. How did you do? Some of these are part of the Show Me tab in Tableau, and some are a little bit new. Today, I'm not going to teach you how to make these charts, but I'll teach you again why and when you would use them. So what I've done here is match them with the specific purpose to give you a couple of options to choose from when you go through this exercise. And we'll be distributing this presentation after the fact too. So if you would like that, you can have access to that too. So I'm going to go through this a little quickly, but again, you'll have access to this. So let's say you have a specific values question. A lot of times, we might solve this with a table or a crosstab, as you can see on the left. But as you can see on the right, it's very easy to add shape or color for a quick visual. The middle one, those are custom shapes in Tableau. And then for the highlight table, I would say consider removing the labels if it gets a little bit too busy. But again, if your question is a specific values question, then perhaps you do actually want to use those labels. So let's say you have a correlation question. Maybe instead of a bar chart and a line chart together, consider using a scatter plot or a bubble plot. So a bubble plot is basically like a scatter plot. You've just dropped another measure on size. So you're able to look at 3 separate measures together. And then one quick tip for scatter plots, just reduce the transparency and add a border to the circles so you can see each individual item. Let's say you have a comparing measures question. So let's say over here on the left, we have 2016 sales, we have 2017 sales, and then we have our target. So instead of making those 3 separate bars, consider a bar and bar chart or a bullet chart. So a bar and bar chart is basically like a skinny bar inside of a fat bar. And a bullet chart is basically like a bar chart with a reference line. You can play around with use of color here to either incentivize or penalize. So over on the left, with the bar and bar chart, perhaps our eyes are drawn towards the orange. So that's an alarm. Someone hasn't hit their target yet. But over on the right, with the bullet chart, we have green to indicate compliance. So maybe that's more of a friendly gesture. I know a lot of times we are looking for the issue, but sometimes you don't want your employees to be stressed out all the time. So we have green as a nicer sort of nudge. You can add a 3rd bar for additional analysis if you want to. Sometimes that gets busy, so just play around with that. Let's say you want to look at trends over time. So maybe instead of a line chart with, let's say, category on color here, my tip to you is maybe focus on one time trend and use another visualization on the dashboard. Turn on those interactive filters so that you can have them interact together. So a circle timeline, that is just a dot for every single, let's say, transaction, and then the size indicates how big that transaction was. A slope chart is looking at change in time from point A to point B. So as you see, we cut out those inner years, 2015, 2016. And then a highlight table can help you show trends in seasonality or can help you with patterns. So again, depending on the nature of your question, you might use one of these charts. Let's say you're comparing rank. Bar chart is hands down the best chart. But I would say make sure that you sort either ascending or descending and make those bars horizontal, because it's easier for us to compare as the bars go down than if they're side by side. My tip for packed bubble charts, only use them with a small amount of bubbles or with large variation in size, because it's harder for us to interpret differences in area rather than differences in length. The last one is a bump chart. So that's looking at rank over time. A lot of times we'll see this with, let's say, sports leagues. So maybe you want to know how a team ranked over time in a season. And so I would recommend using that if specific values are not important. Or again, you can put a specific values chart on the dashboard and have them work together if you want to. So let's say you're comparing parts to whole. Here's my sort of rule of thumb that I use with my customers. Use pies or donuts if it's 2 or less. So a donut chart is basically like a pie chart with a white circle on top of it. So it's just hiding the middle behind it. Use stacked bars with 3 or less dimensions. And then use tree maps with 4 or more dimensions. It's very space efficient. It doesn't take up too much white space. As you can see, there's a lot of white space around the donut. For distribution, so again, we've flipped our box plot on its side, and I would say consider hiding the underlying dots in the box plot if you want to focus on the outliers. And then for the dot strip plot, again, make those circles transparent and add a border so you can see each one. Then for mapping, if you can, add a map. I think that's visually pleasing. You have a point map, a filled map, or a hex map. So consider a hex map to sort of normalize the size. Here with California and Texas, people might interpret the size to indicate something else. So on a hex map, the focus is on color as what you're trying to convey to your audience. All right, so we've gone through the last 2 steps together. So let's do this exercise together on our questions. So what are my overall sales? This is a specific values chart question. Which chart would you choose? Right, I heard KPI. It depends on your question, but let's say we only want to see one number and we want to see that trend compared to last year. So we add a little arrow. Let's say the second question, is there seasonality to my sales? This is a time question. Which chart would you choose? Highlight table, great. How much does each product contribute to overall sales? Let's say you have 3 products. Stacked bar, great. Have I met my target for overall sales? Which chart would you choose? I would say that you could choose either one. In this instance, I chose the bullet chart, just a little key indicator here saying, have I met my target? So I'm thinking that this might be a incentivizing dashboard, but chart, so you can use either. Let's say you want to know who are the top 5 consumers of beignets. You're comparing rank. Which chart would you choose? Bar chart, great. So again, limit packed bubbles to 3 or less. What about this question, a distribution question? Do I have any outliers outside of my spread of normal distribution of beignet consumption? Which one would you choose? Great, I heard box plot. So again, emphasis on the outliers here. What about this correlation question? Does the number of beignets consumed relate to the number of times an attendee has been to New Orleans before? Does this also correlate with the number of beignets consumed in one sitting? Which chart would you choose? Great, bubble plot. So again, we're comparing 3 different things. And then lastly, a mapping question where most of these beignets consumed at Café du Monde. Which one would you choose? I chose a point map. So I've been actually to both Café du Monde and Café Beignet. They're pretty good. So now it's your turn with a neighbor. Again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes for this exercise, and I would like you to return to the questions that you came up with and identify the purpose, and then select the chart. So I'm going to put this up as your cheat sheet, and you'll have 5 minutes for this exercise. Okay, let's wrap it up. Thanks. So some quick notes on this. These are by no means the only charts that are limited to these specific purposes. There's a lot more out there, but I think this is a good framework or a good start for you. I've added some more resources at the end too, but Andy Kriebel created a workbook called Visual Vocabulary on Tableau Public that is a very extensive resource too, so I would look there. So the next question probably after this is, I've selected my chart, great. So how do I put these all in a dashboard? I could probably spend another hour talking about this topic, so perhaps stay tuned next year. But it's all a process, right? You have a set of questions that you want to answer, and one chart is not going to answer all of those questions. It's going to be a lot of them together on a dashboard. And so what I would say to you is iterate. So look at many different options and look at how they sit on a dashboard together. Again, I have this tip here about using one chart per dimension and turning on interactive filters so that you don't have, let's say, region repeated every single time in each chart. Let's say you only have one region chart, one time chart, one product chart, so that they all interact together. And I'd also say consider using different chart types on dashboards to break up the monotony. I'm sure you've seen dashboards with a bunch of bar charts, which I love bar charts, but they can get a little old. I had this one customer who she just loved bubbles, so she wanted everything circular. And so I gave her a couple of different options with that. You get a donut chart, you get your scatter plot, you get the dot strip plots. So some people have their preferences, but I find oftentimes when I present multiple different options, it's easier for people to say, I don't like that, I don't like that. Okay. So if you're presenting this to someone else, I would present them with multiple different options and see what they look like together. So let's go back through our objectives again. I wanted to give you a structured process for decision making. I wanted to empower you to make the right choice, and I wanted to help you unleash your full creativity. So I hope when you go through this process, I think it's pretty simple, but I think the key step is asking those questions to dig deeper into, so what? Why is this important? What action do you want your audience to take? Take some time thinking about that before you go into choosing your charts. That'll help dictate everything that you do. I don't know what that was. So here are some of the more resources. So I mentioned visual vocabulary. Again, I'll be sending out this PowerPoint too, so I realize that you can't click on these links right now. But also, a lot of the resources online, they sort of tell you about each chart individually. But I found that the reason why I created this presentation was because no one really looked at them all together and told you when and why you would use them. I would say the last resource, 20 Ways to Visualize KPIs, that's a really cool resource. He tells you, again, the pros and cons of using different charts. And the first session is over already, but I would say here are some related sessions if you're interested. Speed tipping is really exciting and fun. It goes really fast, but you learn a lot, and you can return to it later. And before I take questions, don't forget to fill out the survey. They said if I was bad, they would give me the boot, but I already have one. So, does anyone have any questions? Yeah, in the back. Yeah, so the question was, I work with people who really like to see tables of numbers. Is there a way to get them away from that and towards visuals? And I would say start them off slowly. Try to introduce maybe the KPI with just a little indicator. It's a tough battle. But again, if you give them a couple different options, it might be a good way to introduce some visuals to them. Because again, they can say, I don't like that. That's kind of cool. So I know it's a process, but hopefully that helps. Yes? How do I feel about color? Right. So color consistency is very key. So if you use one color on the dashboard, make sure that you continue to use that color to indicate the same thing on that dashboard. And again, I think the idea behind color, what's the purpose of your dashboard? What's the purpose of the task? Is it to identify all of the worst offenders? Is it to incentivize employees to comply to something? I would say try to keep colors to a minimum and only use it when it's actually useful to highlight something to draw someone's eye to. And then I would say the same thing, iterate and try different options and see what people like. Yes? Are there any visualizations that I think are particularly bad or would avoid? Crosstabs? Tables? I mean, I don't think so. I mean, it really depends, right? So I think when I design dashboards, I try to design them so that whoever's looking at it doesn't need to spend more than 10 seconds trying to figure it out. I mean, you can sort of supplement that with instructions on the dashboard, but then there's a lot of text, and so you kind of sort of have to weigh that together. But I don't think there's a bad chart out there. It's just about how do you use color? How do you use that in relation to other charts on the dashboard? What kind of concept are you trying to explain? So I wouldn't put any in the doghouse. Yes? Sorry, can you say that again? Oh, sure, yeah. Make me walk all the way over here. Oh. Oh, the pink one. Sorry. This one? Okay. Yes. Do I have any tips to design dashboards for people who don't know what they want to see? Well, hopefully you'll have gone through the process of asking them questions about what they want to know, perhaps. And then I would say give them a lot of different options to choose from. Like I said, I think it's easier for people to say, it's easier to remove things and to cut things out than to sort of theorize and think of what you might want. People know what they don't like, but it's harder for them to sort of think about that. So I don't know if that was helpful. Yes, in the back. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Do you mind coming a little closer, please? Why are donuts better than pies? Because they taste better? I'm not saying donuts are better than pies. I think with donuts, what you actually get is you're able to put a metric on the inside of the circle. So that could be interesting if you wanted to add another layer to your visualizations. So say you have, let's say you want to know percent of total of like men versus women. Then you can have like the total number of participants in the center of the donut. So that could give you an extra layer. It just depends. I think I like them better because there's white space, and I think I like the white space as a design concept, but you can use either or. Good question. Yes, over there. How do I feel about stacked bars and also showing the volume of size? It could be too much. I would say really think about if those are two separate questions, and if you can pull that out, that almost sounds like you might need a scatter plot because you're comparing a couple of different measures in relation to each other. So as long as you have like a legend or anything like that to explain it, I think when I'm thinking about it at first glance, I don't think it's very intuitive for people to look at different sized bars that are also stacked bars. So I would test it on a couple of people and see how they feel. I think I saw another question. Nope. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you have a good rest of conference.